are devs. Ooh, that's a lot of you.
I'm outnumbered.
You are way outnumbered. Who's ops? Okay, so all the ops people go and sit in that corner? I'm kidding. All right. So I got a clicker, and the clicker works. All right, cool. So this session is called DevOps, Increasing Application Lifecycle Efficiencies with Microsoft Visual Studio and System Center. Nice, concise title, right? So we're going to show you some stuff with System Center. We're going to show you some stuff with Visual Studio. Hopefully it makes for a nice round trip, and it's an entertaining story as we go along. My name is Larry Guger. I'm a program manager with the Visual Studio team. And
I'm Charlie Satterfield. I'm a program manager in the Cloud and Data Center Management team.
So cloud and data center management. So you manage the cloud.
We build tools to manage the cloud.
Okay, so the thunderstorms, they're his problem, right? Okay, so we're going to start with a bit of a story and a bit of an introduction. This DevOps thing is kind of new. Lots of people have heard of it, lots of people haven't. A lot of people are still trying to figure out what the heck does it mean. We're still kind of trying to figure out what the heck does it mean, but we have a story to tell you about it anyway. To begin with, I want to talk a little bit about how we got to this whole DevOps thing. And it all started with Agile. Who's doing Agile here? Everybody's doing Agile. Well, most everybody's doing Agile. All right, I see a couple of guys from Microsoft who said, I'm not doing Agile. But that's okay. So the reason that we did Agile was to respond to change. That's my one-sentence little nugget, right? What's Agile all about? It's all about responding to change. We were doing this waterfall thing for an awful long time, where people said, this is what I want you to build. And I would go, all right, okay, cool. I can go and do that, right? And I'd disappear into my basement for 3 years. And I'd say, here's your product. And they'd go, no, that's not what, okay, that thing there, but all the rest of it's wrong, right? So we ran into these challenges where you'd go dark for a very long period of time. You'd produce something, but it wasn't exactly what the user really wanted, right? So there's this disconnect between the development team and the stakeholders. So we figured, how do we solve these problems, right? And it's all about increasing communication, increasing collaboration, and delivering much faster so that I can put something together in a sprint, a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, and I can show it to the stakeholders, and they go, yeah, that's pretty close, right? Change this little thing over here, and I'll be happy. So, okay, so I changed that little thing. Then a couple of weeks, a couple of months later, I've got another increment, and they go, yeah, that's good, except change this little thing. And we do this incrementally over and over until we have a nice product that we ship out the door. None of this has anything to do with tools. Agile is a philosophy, it's a mindset, it's an approach to doing business. Tools came out of this, right? To be able to respond faster, we started doing things like writing unit tests. Now you get a bunch of unit test frameworks. We started doing continuous integration, automated builds. And you need tools to do all of that stuff. Because to react faster, you need a stable code base that you can guarantee when you make these changes, it's going to remain stable. Okay, so we all know that. Everybody knows that already. I'm just talking about history. Well, the next thing that sort of came along, and is still, gaining adoption in a lot of circles, is lean. Who here is kind of doing something that they might consider is lean-ish? Okay, fewer. So lean here's my one-sentence little blurb for lean, right? It's all about reducing waste. And this came out of the Toyota manufacturing system. A lot of manufacturing embraced lean. And it's about how do I reduce the waste in my manufacturing process so that I don't have as much overhead and I don't end up throwing away as much stuff. So when you think from a manufacturing process, if I build 50,000 bumpers, then when I put the first one on the car and I go, ooh, it doesn't quite fit, now I got to rework 49,999 of them, or I got to throw them away and I got to do something all over again, right? So reduce your inventory. When you start thinking about that as it applies to software development, it's all about reducing the amount of work you have in process. WIP, right? So how much WIP do you have? When I start doing my development, if there's me and 20 other developers on the team, and we all pick up a story of our own, and we all start writing our own story, and I finish my story, and the other guys finish their stories, and then we toss it over to QA, and they all start working all this sort of stuff. We've got like 20 stories in progress at that point, and then I pick up another story, and my devs pick up stories, and we've got a whole bunch of work in progress. I may be working on stories, which are nice and concise, that the business collaborated with to help me define that, but if I have a whole pile of them in process all at the same time, I've got a lot of work in progress, and I may find out that I've got too much. I can't get it all done. If I can get my entire team to really focus on as small a number of items as possible, they'll get through the stream faster, I'll be able to deliver my functioning software quicker, and I'll be able to get to an end product more reliably. Now, those two things really focus on the development team and the business stakeholders, right? So how can we collaborate and make sure that we're delivering things better and faster? So the next step leads us into DevOps. And this is what we do when we start to incorporate all of IT into the development process. So we've got a couple of slides now to talk about DevOps. And really, there's a real strong business motivator to get to DevOps now. One of them is we have a whole lot of new technology that are enabling a bunch of business opportunities. So think of this strictly from a business perspective, right? These are the stakeholders that are saying, hey, give me this thing and give it to me quickly. We've got things like my phone talks to my car. I've got opportunities to build software into a car now that didn't exist before. So I've got this whole huge new area of opportunity ahead of me. So there's and that's just one little example. But technology is opening up doors of software invention and innovation that never existed before. So I've got lots of business opportunities to go and create some new thing. Direct to consumer, right? So I'm packing a phone. Everybody's got a Surface, right? Everybody buy a nice cheap Surface? That's cool. Sweet, yeah. I was going to say I wish I could get one that cheap, but I got one for free, so, there are some perks. Anyway, so I've got all of these devices, and I want to just buy stuff from companies directly. I don't want to have to go to a middleman to buy my product. I don't want to buy Nikes from some store. I want to buy Nikes from Nike. I want to buy, whatever that thing is directly from the consumer, because I should have access to their sites. As Nike, I'm kind of going, why do I need to sell my shoes to a middleman? I just want to sell them to the guy that wants to buy the shoes. So the businesses are going, I've got an opportunity for greater profit because I can talk directly to a consumer. And consumers are going, I should be able to get things cheaper because I don't have to deal with this middleman, right? So it's a win-win all over the place. So we've got technology that's enabling those scenarios. And I hinted, I've got a phone, I've got my Surface, everybody's got all of these mobile devices, so you've got instant access to information everywhere, and consumers are demanding it. Right? Everybody wants to be able to check on the status of whatever their widget happens to be all of the time. Right? I need to know the status. I need to know what's going on. I want to check my Twitter account. I want to check my Facebook. I want to, so you've got all of the stuff. So there's all of these opportunities. I know everybody wants it, so they're demanding me to deliver new products. I've also got opportunities to deliver new products that can go into all of these brand new marketplaces that exist with these mobile devices. And then, of course, there's this cloud thing that Charlie manages. And what I've heard is that people are putting stuff into the cloud and other people are buying it. I need to get onto that, right? And I'll let Charlie help me figure out how I take advantage and monetize the cloud. And then there's compete velocity. All of this stuff means that app that Charlie and I have been working on in our basement, we can build that to compete with anybody. I can compete with the Amazons of the world because I've got the reach now. I can publish out my phone app. I can publish out my Windows 8 store app. I can publish out a site on the cloud that anybody can get to anytime and access our cool new product. And you guys are all going to want to access this product because it comes with steak knives. Okay, that was a total dud. Okay, so really, the key message behind this compete velocity is not only can I compete with anybody anywhere in the world, but I have to worry about anybody anywhere in the world competing with me, because they have access to the same stuff that I have. You no longer have to worry about the big guys competing with the big guys. You're competing with, the little guys, the me and Charlie in our basement working on some cool new little app that, Google's going to buy for $1.2 billion or whatever that was, right? But that's the scale. That's the compete velocity that's going on. People can push out apps crazy fast, and you've got to keep an eye on it. So there's a whole lot of business incentive right now that's driving me as a business stakeholder to try and say, I need apps fast, I need them in production, I need them yesterday. So, Charlie, what are you as an ops guy going to do to help me as a stakeholder?
So as an ops guy, wow, you've got a lot of big dreams and aspirations there.
Big. Go big or go home.
And I need to figure out what technology I'm going to be putting in place to actually implement that with your app. And as I look at that, taking the business forward, I'm really looking at what enhances in the OS have come along. What are the enhances in virtualization technology that are out there that allow me to take advantage of the private cloud now? Or maybe I want to take advantage of the public cloud. Things that give me the ability to expand rapidly in the amount of capacity I have from a compute standpoint. The faster time to market. Again, I no longer have to put the order in of my servers and wait 3 months until they're in the data center and then they've been racked and the OS has been configured. And 4 or 5 months from now, I'm ready to deploy the app. I can spin up my VMs in the public cloud. I can spin them up perhaps in my own private cloud. And I'm ready to deploy very, very quickly. Continuous value delivery. This is the life cycle of managing everything within Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server. You're able to actually do your automated builds, run your tests within Team Foundation Server, and then deploy with automation, a repeatable, testable method. Balancing agility with quality, scale, and compliance. Really, this is how quickly can I get that app or that feature in production with the minimal amount of testing to ensure that I know that it's going to perform. Using things like my private cloud or the public cloud, I can spin up identical VMs, put my new features on those VMs, and perhaps route just a subset of my customers to the new VM to try and validate with real customer data. And then lastly, maximizing economies of scale. As Larry mentioned, I can now grow not just amount of servers, but also geolocate. I can actually have a presence much like many of my big competitors now that I have my app ready, and it's on 2 VMs now, but hopefully it's going to grow. So that really is the business of IT, is business monetization. And I think we've got some demos that are going to be in just a few minutes that will explain how we go about that DevOps now. But first, let's talk a little bit about some of the common challenges that we, as a two-man shop, and you as large organizations may face in this application lifecycle and DevOps. First, so I'm starting down in the lower right-hand quadrant. Isolated operation tools and workflows. As an ops team, I'm living in System Center. As a dev team, they're living in Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio. We have different backlogs, completely different technologies.
Yeah, I don't like to talk to you that much.
Yeah, I know. So that presents a challenge because our workflow is not integrated. We're not handing things off in a very efficient manner, and things may be dropping between the seams there. Next, our users potentially are detecting problems in production before we are. All right? And nobody wants a user to be experiencing problems that you can't detect. They may be running off to your competitor, and it's few and far between that customer will actually contact you and let you know that you've got an issue with your application. So you need to be able to actually detect those in production. Next, common challenge is it's hard to debug those production issues. Sometimes you have to pull the server out of rotation, and you may not be able to replicate the issue that was experienced under true user load. It may have been a capacity issue. It may have been the data sample that was coming through. Those are all challenges that we have to deal with. And then when we finally hand off the data to development, may not be enough for them really to replicate and get to the bottom of things.
So everybody, I'm sure, has encountered the problem where something's going wrong in production. You've got event logs, you've got some logging that you've added in, maybe you've got some ETW, maybe you've got some perf events, but it's not a whole lot of data, and it's not giving you some really actionable feedback that you need to reduce your MTTR. So who here knows what MTTR stands for? One guy. Okay, no, first guy back there. All right. I was never a pitcher. So I got M&Ms for, no, stay sitting, because this is...
There's a lot of people ducking right now.
I know. I love this part. M&Ms, free M&Ms for the guy that actually raised his hand that knows what mean time to resolution is all about, right? How quickly can you fix that bug and get the fix into production so that the problem is gone, right? You want to reduce MTTR as quickly as possible. And then, of course, reproducing that problem in my dev environment. So I've got the data back, and it works on my machine, right? Works in the staging environment, works in the test environment, but there's something different about production. Maybe it's a server configuration that's different, and those can be, hard to track down. Quite often it can be a data problem, right? So the data that your users are pushing into your data stores aren't the same data that you've got in your test environments as you're developing the software. That can quite often be a huge problem, and it can be really tough to sort of bring back and understand. And then, of course, long deployment times. Now, that's never a developer problem.
We have schedules.
There are schedules. Of course, Charlie always questions the code that I produce, and he says, yeah, I need to actually test this in some other environments and make sure it all works right, because we have trust issues. So these are some of the challenges that we've identified. We've seen them within our organization. I know you guys haven't seen any of these, but come along with us for the ride, and we'll talk about how we can address some of these challenges so that when you go and talk to other people, you can kind of say, well, here's some challenges that you probably have. All right, so I think this is now.
I think we're going to jump over to the demo.
Let's do some demos.
Yeah, so hold on here. Let me bring up the right thing. Am I on the right one? No, that one's the right one. All right. So we've deployed our application previously. We actually implemented some new features just last week. And as an operations team, I want to make sure that my application is performing, that it's available, and that my customers have a good experience. So to do that, I'm using System Center Operations Manager. And in particular, I'm using two different features in Operations Manager. I'm using web application availability monitoring and application performance monitoring. I'll show you briefly what I've set up to monitor this application. The first thing I've set up is my web application availability monitoring. It's a pretty simple monitor. And different from the old school transaction monitoring, I can actually provision multiple URLs, multiple tests to occur within this one monitor. Now, if any one of these tests were to fail, the monitor would go red, and I'd be alerted to the fact that there's a problem with my website. Next, I have the ability to monitor it from multiple locations. In this case, I'm using an internal watcher node that I've configured. You can use a gateway, a management server, or an agent. In this case, I've created a resource pool with two different gateways. And I've assigned it a location. It actually exists here in New Orleans with us. Alternatively, I could have added points of presence that exist from outside my network. I could do this using Global Service Monitor. If I were to click Add here and search, I'd get returned the list of all the points of presence that I could replicate this test to. And that gives me the comfort of understanding that no matter where my customers are, I'll understand whether or not the site is available for them. So I'll go ahead and cancel out of that. And I will show you briefly that, yep, the site is it's available. So if I look at the status here, yeah, no, it shows as green. And I can look at either a summary dashboard map, in this case, It's not as valuable because I'm only monitoring from one location. But the other thing available is this detailed dashboard list that gives me some indication as to the performance of my application. If I were to select several of the tests that go through, I can see over a 24-hour period what the performance on some of these counters has been, from a total transaction time, time to first byte, content time. You see I've got a few spikes there, and I may need to go look into a few things. But one of the challenges with web tests is, as long as the page is rendering, it'll return back success. If there is an exception that perhaps is captured by Larry's code and we display an error message, it's not going to get that information back to me. So one of the other things that I've implemented is an application performance monitor to be able to detect what exceptions may be thrown by our application. So let me next, really quick, jump into the authoring workspace again. And you can see here I've set up a monitor for Fabricam Fiber. And these are very simple to configure. As long as you have the ISMPs and the APM MPs installed, any of your apps that have been discovered will show up when you click Add and then Search. In this case, I've only got the one application on this box, so I'm only getting returned one application. Now, the beauty of this is once I provision this, now I don't want to save my changes. Once I provision this, I start to get data back from APM about my application. I start to collect information about the performance and application failure events that are occurring as users are visiting my site. Now, one of the things, there's a couple different consoles. One of them is Application Diagnostics Console. And in this console, I've opened this up and I can see that I actually have a few issues going on. And I'm not quite sure how many of them might be identical, so I'm going to go ahead and group by problem type. And what this does is it gives me a fairly concise list, as soon as it refreshes, of all the problems. Oh, it's logged me out. I'm going to have to try that one more time. It'll give me a concise list of all the problems and the number of times they've been hit. So let me go ahead and group by again. And you can see here, I've got several that I've only hit one time. And then I've got a few that are 14, 22, 19 different times. So I can understand how big of an issue this may be as far as the number of people hitting this. It doesn't necessarily tell me what the experience is like, but I can dig further. So I could go ahead and, in this case, let me drill into this one here. I can drill in further, and I can actually get to the call stack and understand where the failure is occurring. Additionally, I could go ahead and download IntelliTrace that was captured while APM was functioning. In this case, I want to go check out, I think that there may be an issue with the new feature we deployed. So let me go and check our reports page, because I know we deployed a new feature there. And, oh, yeah, I can see we encountered a problem. So we did capture an exception here.
Oops. And
it appears we've got some code that needs to be changed. And at this point, I could have downloaded the IntelliTrace from that App Diagnostics console. I could have put it on a share and emailed Larry. But I want to make sure that this is tracked within our tool set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the Operation Manager console and into the monitoring view. And I'm going to go look at some of the active alerts for our application. And we can see here we've got 4 different alerts here. I can see one is actually assigned to engineering already. And what this means is that this has actually been forwarded to Team Foundation Server and an operational issue has been created. There's a Team Foundation Server connector MP, which we've already installed and we've already configured. And we have the ability now to right-click on any one of these and set the resolution state to assigned engineer. This will forward on all the details about this alert and also link to the IntelliTrace that was captured for the application performance event. In this case, a server application exception. So at this point, I've gone ahead and I forwarded over the alert to Team Foundation server. It's ready to be picked up in triage or next day. I'll go ahead and open up my link client and tell Larry I've just added to your backlog. Please take a look in the morning.
Thanks, Charlie. All right. So it appears that I had a wee bit of a problem with my code. So when I come in, one of the first things I do as part of the day is I take a look and see what issues have been assigned over to me from our operations team, do an immediate triage on any production bugs. So I'm going to give you a quick little sneak peek here at the new look and feel of Visual Studio's Team Explorer. So this is what's coming up. I'm going to drill into my work items, and I can see I've got 2 queries already pinned, and these are queries against operational issues. And we can see I've already been working on some up here. We've closed some. And I've also got a new one here. So I want to drill down into these. Oh, now you can see I've got 2 just by clicking on it. How did you do that? There is a bit of a delay between System Center and TFS, right? Because it's not pushing these things out automatically. There's a bit of a schedule. So we just saw that schedule is about as long as it takes for Charlie to hand it off to me.
There's a workflow, and it's configurable via overrides.
So I can now start to look at some of these issues that I've got assigned to me. Let's make this a little bit smaller so we get some more real estate. And I can drill down into the details, and we can see I've got an exception. I can look some of the details. This is a null reference exception. Okay, this is obviously, I missed something in my code that I need to go and address. I've got a link here, and this link will actually take me to that same portal that Charlie was showing you just a few moments ago. So I can actually go onto the website and I can look at all of this. Particularly handy if this is something that I'm triaging from a remote location and I'm not actually at my workstation with Visual Studio open in front of me. So I can access this anywhere. However, I am working in Visual Studio, and I'm particularly interested in diving into the IntelliTrace file that was linked to this. So if I take a look at the links, we can see there's a couple of things here. One of them is the hyperlink back to that portal again. And the other one is a link to an IntelliTrace file. Now, this is actually configurable. You can set in the TFS connector management pack to have IntelliTrace files as links. And this is a link to the share location where System Center is dropping those files. The other option is you can have them configured as attachments to the work item. Now, the difference here is basically all about storage. If I set it as a link to the location on the file system, me as a dev needs to be able to access that share. So that's something that my operations needs to set up for me, and they're going to have to manage that disk space. If we set it up as an attachment, that file is going to be attached to the work item and stored in my TFS database. So now I'm consuming database storage, whichever one kind of works for you, right? So you have that option. So I'm just going to drill into this IntelliTrace file and see what I've got. So I double-click on that. It pulls the IntelliTrace file off of the share on the server, and I can see I've got one null reference exception. Now, I want to show you something that's kind of interesting here. I don't have a solution open, right? When I start debugging, or when I start opening up files within Visual Studio, it just sort of creates this default solution, right? You've probably all seen that many times. But I don't actually have any code. I don't have my project open. Now, as I investigate this null reference exception, I can click on it, and I can see the call stack. I can see I've got some Fabricam fiber code at the top of the stack, so yes, this is obviously an issue that I've got. I'm just going to start debugging. What this does is it now spins up the debug engine within Visual Studio. And if I can just scroll this up a little bit, it's loaded the C# file and placed the cursor at the point in my code where the exception was thrown. Right? And that's why I showed you that I didn't start with any code open. So there's kind of some magic going on here, and I'm going to drill into that magic when I go to make the fix so that we can understand what it takes to make sure that we can get the C# or the VB or whatever your language preferences, file opening up within Visual Studio automatically, because that's really important. I can get to the code really quickly. The other things that you'll see, if I start looking at the call stack, some of the frames in the call stack have parameters that have this @ symbol on them. If I double-click on those, just ignore the symbols because this is actually in framework code. Over in the locals window, we're going to display, it's actually the frame before. That one tends to throw me all the time. In the locals window, I can actually render a whole bunch of additional information that was gathered by the APM agent as it was monitoring my application. One of the really interesting things about this, too, is this is gathered directly from the APM agent, so it's the always-on, low-impact monitoring agent that you can run against your application all the time, as opposed to the full IntelliTrace agent, which is heavier weight, collects different data or more data depending on how it's configured, but can bog down your server. But depending on the type of problem that you have, you may want the full IntelliTrace versus the APM data. So I've got a lot of information here. And what I have learned is I'm throwing a null reference exception on this line. Now, obviously, I hadn't anticipated null objects in the structure of these objects that are being passed in. So it could be the customer object or one of the child objects. My test data, I'd always set up my test data so that there was always a customer always had addresses, and that's not the reality with production data. Our users may not always be filling in all of that data. So this is a fairly simple fix that I need to make. I just need to do some null reference checks to make sure that I'm not going to throw this null reference exception. So I'm just going to exit out of our new Visual Studio and go back to legacy. Right? Isn't that cool when, I start calling like Visual Studio 2012 legacy? Who's on a version older than 2012? All right, we got cool stuff. New stuff is coming, right? So anyways, this is the line of code that's causing the problem, and all I really need to do is add some null reference checks. So I don't want to bore you guys with watching me type a null reference check. So being a good demoer, I've got my little snippet in here. So I'm just going to drop this in. It's a fairly simple little thing, right? So I just check to make sure that my customer object isn't null. If it is null, return a nice no customer found message that'll go out onto the screen. Otherwise, I'll populate it with the data that I was expecting to populate it with. So, actually, let me back out this change for a second. So, I'm a good Agile developer, right? I've got a problem, and there's a couple approaches that I can do to try and repro the problem. I now understand that it's a data issue because I had assumed I was always going to have this data. It's not true. And I can either change my test database so that I'm missing some of this data. I can maybe get a backup from production, get it from Charlie. If I know this isn't going to interfere with my production data, because this is a read-only operation, maybe I can connect directly to my production database. But really what I want to do is once I've done that, I just want to run and see if I can reproduce the problem. So I'm going to spin this up just in my development environment. I'm using my development server, just my local, the one that comes as part of Visual Studio. I click on my reports, and there's the exception. Okay, so that's all good. I can reproduce the problem. Let me capture my URL here, because what I want to do is, being a good developer, I want to create a test so that I can catch this issue again in the future. So I'm going to come down into my test project, and I'm going to add a new web test. I'm going to run this against my local server. And that comes up fine. I'm going to go to my reports tab. I'm going to make sure I've still got the error message, and I'm going to stop my test. Now, what I want to do is I've got that wonderful drat message, right? So that's me being clever, and I'm hiding the yellow screen of death because nobody likes to see that. And I'm putting up this nice friendly error messages so my users, don't get all angst about the yellow screen of death. Now they get angst about my error message instead, right? So I've got my known error message, and what I want to do is I want to test to see if that error message is ever going to be displayed to my users. So I've got my test results here, and I'm just going to add a new validation rule. So I've got my validation rule here, and what I want to do is I want to find text. So I want to see if drat is ever rendered on any of these screens. And if it is found, I'm going to fail the test. All right, well, let's just run this test, and this test should fail, right? So here's the good Agile guy. I'm writing my test. Now, granted, this isn't a unit test, but this should still fail. Okay, red, right? So now I need to make my test green. So let's stop that, close that, come back in here, and let's put that fix in place again. All right. So let's just do a build. And once that's built, let's go back to my test and let's run it again. Now, if I've done this correctly, my test should pass. Red, green, we should be good to go. All right. So I've got a test pass. Everything looks good. I'm going to check this in. I'm going to go over to my Team Explorer, look at my pending changes. And whoops, fixed the null bug. Check this in. Okay. Now, of course, since I'm a good Agile developer and I wrote my tests and everything, I also have continuous builds going. So we can see there's my new build. It kicked off as part of my check-in. Now, what I want to do while that's running is I just want to show you a little bit about my build definition. This is the magic that allows that C# file to open up automatically when I'm using the IntelliTrace file. I've got all of these different steps as part of my builds. And what I want to drill into is this one right here, source and symbol server settings. So by default, what you're going to get out of the box is we're going to have index sources set to true. What this does is when you check code into TFS, it's going to index all of those and it's going to store that index. So we know the change set that's associated when you check code into Team Foundation Server. When a build occurs, we capture all of that information. We stuff that information into your symbol files. Everybody knows what a symbol file is, right? Those PDB files that you delete? Well, don't. We need those. Those are important, right? Now, the next thing that we've got here is this path to publish symbols. This is not filled in by default because I don't know where you guys want to store these things. Now, what a symbol file does is it provides a mapping between those binaries, those DLLs that you're going to deploy onto your servers, and the source code stored within Team Foundation Server. When either APM or IntelliTrace is monitoring your application, we're capturing the metadata out of those binaries, we're recording it, and that's getting put into the IntelliTrace log. So when I open up that IntelliTrace log and I start debugging, one of the things I do is I go looking for those symbols. Now, what I need to do within Visual Studio is I need to set my symbol path, which is just type symbols into the little find thing in the top right-hand corner there. And it's under the debugger settings, under Tools Options. Set your symbol path to the same path as what I've got here. So when Visual Studio fires up my IntelliTrace log, it says, hey, there are symbols that exist that match these DLLs. Go find them. Visual Studio is going to go and look in those paths that you've configured within Visual Studio. If you've got this path configured, it's going to go and look there. And we do some matching, so we make sure that we get the matching symbols for your build. If you build a second time, deploy new binaries, and don't save your new symbols, the old symbols ain't going to work, right? Because you could have changed your code. In fact, we're assuming you're going to change your code. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here, too, is you can do a release build with symbols. This does not have to be a debug build. Release builds is perfectly fine, as long as I have the symbols. Within the symbol files, once I'm debugging and I've loaded those into Visual Studio, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find the C# file that matches. Now, I'm going to look in a couple of different places. One of the places I'm going to look is where were these files dropped when a build was done. Now, if this is done on a build server, maybe that's some X drive, right? So I'm going to search my local machine for this X drive and the path where they were dropped, and it doesn't exist. Okay, fine. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to look in TFS, and I'm going to find the matching version out of TFS because I've indexed my sources. And I'm going to pull the matching version regardless of how many times it's been changed in between, and I'm going to load that up into Visual Studio. So that's how the magic happens, right? It's all about those two little settings and making sure you save your symbol files and make sure you have your path in Visual Studio set to there. Okay, so that's my little rant on symbols. All right, my build is done. Let's take a look at this. Everything's green, that's good. Now, at this point, there's lots of different ways of how you manage the next step. What's your question, sir? Okay, so how does that work with different versions in different environments? If we take a look at my build drops location, well, here's my symbols location, and you can see file folders are named after the name of the symbol file, and if I drill into those, you can see I've got 3 versions there that match those 3 different builds that I've done, right? And it's all GUID matching, right? So the wonderful GUID thing that we all got. So we hang on to all of them. And what that also means is if you're doing lots and lots and lots of builds, you're going to accumulate lots and lots and lots of symbol files. So you want to make sure that you set your retention policies. So this isn't a build talk. Look up retention policies if you're not familiar with those. So no quality assigned here. The way Charlie and I work is we rely on this build quality. So I'm going to mark this as initial test pass because all of my automated tests passed. That was all wonderful. My new web tests, we ran those against my test servers. So this is all good. This is now an indication for our QA team to pick up this build and to run this build through their quality gates. So do all of the UAT testing and any other manual testing that they may want to do. And your QA team, right? Yes. We're a small team. Once QA has said, yep, this is good, this is wonderful, ready to go, they then take this and they set it for ready for deployment. And you can hook into this. There's an API to latch onto this. Whatever your process happens to be, it's totally fine, right? So we're just giving an example of one. So once I say this is ready for deployment, I'm done. And I say, Charlie, it's ready to go. Make it happen.
Did you resolve the bug?
Oh.
We are following processes.
He is a stickler for detail. All right. Okay. No, I didn't resolve the bug. All right. All right. So I guess the first thing that I really should have done is I should have accepted it. Because once I accept it, that lets him know that I've actually picked it up. But by delaying accepting it, it looks like I fixed it much faster. Right?
Here I thought you just were ignoring me.
Yes, well, it could be that too. All right, so once I've accepted it, our build is good. I'm going to say this is resolved. And we've got a couple of key fields that now become required, and I'm going to assign this to my network administrator. And I'm going to say problem fixed, please deploy. And since he was bugging me about the whole mark the bug complete, I'm going to say this is important. All right. Happy?
I am.
Okay.
Now that that's done, as the operations team, I can actually go back in and understand, this should refresh here shortly, that my problem is fixed. He's communicated to me, but I can also see that by looking in the alert view for Fabricam, and I can see that this alert is now resolved. So if I drilled into that alert and I went to the History tab, I can actually see here that the notes that he attached to that work item are now attached to this alert. So I've got the artifacts there telling me that, yes, indeed, work has been done on this, it's resolved, I'm okay to go ahead and deploy this. So let me get out of here. So I'm going to jump over to our production server, and our build has been copied over here. And the first thing I'm going to do, how many of you attended yesterday's session on the desired state configuration PowerShell module. I saw
You
one,
raised
two.
your hand before you even said what
I
the
know.
session was, though.
DSC. Yes.
All right. Are you
No,
ready?
no,
Are you
no.
ready for it?
Larry?
No?
All right, go for it.
All right, come on. All right, so he's got a shield.
Oh, that was...
That was
Okay.
close.
Yeah.
They got a lot of drag. There's a lot of resistance.
Yes. All right. So, as the operations team, I'm going to actually take advantage of desired state configuration module, and I'm going to check that settings on my production environment match what my dev team is expecting. My dev and test team actually maintain their desired state configuration in their code base. So they make changes there, it's checked into source control, and it gets deployed as part of the project so that I can easily access and run this. So I'm going to right-click on this and open this up just to see what we're testing against. So for the purpose of this demo, we've actually created a custom IIS module, checks a couple settings. And we can see here I'm going to go against node localhost. I could alternatively run this against a remote host if I wanted to. And I'm going to be checking the website Fabricam Fiber, and I'm going to be checking a few different settings. I want to make sure that my physical path is under inetpub www root. I'm going to check to make sure that my app pool name is specified correctly. It appears that the dev team is expecting version 4.0 of the .NET Framework, and then that my app pool identity is application pool identity, and that we're using pipeline mode, app pool managed pipeline mode of integrated. So at the end of this PowerShell script, I've got a couple commands. The second to the last there is the start DSC configuration command with a -what-if. Now that -what-if, what it does is make sure that when it runs through and it does the checks on all the settings, it displays only the changes that it would roll forward. It does not make the changes itself. So if I were to uncomment the last line and run this, it would actually make the changes that it found for any differences. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And it should take a moment here to get through a short file. And we can see here it actually did detect a few differences. Apparently, my production server is using version 2.0 of the .NET Framework. And my managed pipeline mode for the application pool is classic. So,
Can't you just upgrade? It's just production, right?
it's just production.
Like, 4.0 is so much cooler. Man. 4.5?
4.5? Maybe. So the point of all this is, no, we can't just upgrade immediately. Unfortunately, I am the operations team out of the two of us, and we actually have a couple other apps that are running on this server, and it might break them.
Yeah, I suppose.
So
yeah,
we need to validate that
You
before
win.
we go forward.
Yep.
So
We do.
I'm going to kick this back to my dev team, and they need to make sure that they change this and that they validate their changes that they made in the code base work on my production settings.
Right. Okay. So obviously, if we're running different versions of the framework, different pipeline modes within IIS, these are really good candidates for our application not working, right? So my tests all pass, QA went, yeah, that's all wonderful. We deploy it, it fails. So the way that we're actually planning on doing this out is when I do my builds and when I do my deploys and tests, I'm using the DSC to actually configure my test environments. So the way my test environments are configured and the way I'm testing my app is coded. This is configuration as code, right? This is automation, this is repeatable, this is where you want to be. So what I need to do is I need to obviously update that DSC. So here's my DSC file. This is the same one that got dropped. And I need to change, let's not change the V. Let's change it to version 2.0 of the framework and change it from integrated to classic. And then I can save that. And of course, what that then means is I need to do another check-in because I'm going to check in my changes. All of my configuration of my servers, my environment, is checked in with my code, right? And this is the way it should be. This is keeping it all configured. It's all source controlled. It's all versioned. This is my DSC update to old stuff. So I can check that in, and of course this is going to kick off another automated build. We're not going to go through that all again. But as part of my build output, my environment configuration, I'm now going to be configuring my servers to be using 2.0 of the framework and to be using the classic pipeline. Now what this may very well result in is a failing app within my test environment, because maybe I'm taking advantage of some newer features in the 4.0 framework, or maybe I'm relying on integrated, although I'm pretty sure this app will be fine in classic mode. But it may identify some problems that I have with my app that are infrastructure based and have absolutely nothing to do with my code per se. So we've already captured a bunch of things. This is much better, and I can say, all right, we'll go through this whole process again. I've got the DSC fixed up. I've made a couple of changes to my app.
And it's working.
It's all working.
All right. So the last step then, we'll go ahead and go back to our production machine. And we have our new build that Larry just supplied, and we'll run the same check. So on this one, we'll validate here that, yep, it looks like version 2.0 is now in the DSC file and the classic pipeline mode. So I'll go ahead and run this, and I expect that it should succeed and not tell me, yep. So it's detected no variance from our dev environment to our production environment. So I should be good to go ahead and put this into production. So I can go ahead and deploy this code. After I've deployed this code, though, I'm thinking back to some of the things you did in changing that, even though I technically wasn't in the office when you made that change.
But you're scrutinizing, aren't you?
Yes, I know. Anyway, I noticed you put together a Visual Studio web test in that, and you ran that against the code in dev.
I did.
Test.
I validate my error. I fix. It's all good.
So the interesting thing here is the test that Larry just put together and ran in his dev and test environment, I can actually take advantage of that test now in Operations Manager. I can use the global service monitor.
You're talking about my web test?
Yes, your web test. So I can actually
cool.
upload that using Operations Manager and run it against our production environment. I need to tweak it a little bit so it accesses the production URL, but I can take that same test and I can now run that same test against our production environment.
Tell me more.
Tell you more?
I'm intrigued.
So it's very simple, and I won't go through all the details because I want to offer up a few details to tell on Thursday in my next session that dives deeper into this. But let me go back into Operations Manager. And on the authoring workspace, you can see here I've got Visual Studio Web Test Monitoring. Again, I can go ahead and click Add Monitoring Wizard, brings up the monitoring wizard. And I've got a resolution issue here. So I'll hide that. I'm going to go ahead and select Visual Studio Web Test Monitoring from the wizard. And I'll type a friendly name here, Test for Drat. And I'll select my Fabricam Monitor Web. Now on this screen, in the Web Application Availability Monitor wizard, this is where you'd put one or more URLs, or you'd open up a CSV file to copy in one or more URLs. On this screen, I'm now able to add one or more web test files. So in this case, I can simply grab this web test file, click Open. I can change the test name if I desire. And then if I click Next and I go through the end of this process, I can select that same list of 15 points of presence to test this from around the world. So now I can understand if any one of our customers ever hit this particular issue again. And so
that's nice.
We should be good to go now from a monitoring standpoint.
Cool. I like it.
All right. I think that takes us to the end of our demo.
I think it does.
Yes.
All right. So it was a nice long stretch of demos, and it's a return to the slides.
We could have worked the transition a little bit better.
We could have.
Yes.
Yeah. They're not all winners.
No. So with that, let's talk a little bit briefly, review the solutions that we have in place now for some of the common challenges. First, the ALM integrated tools and workflows. I don't have to, as an operations team, move out of System Center. I can still stay in the Operations Manager console, and I can forward over alerts to my dev team. I can assign them to them using the TFS connector, and that workflow cycles back and gives me the resolution status once they're all done. Next, testing and production. I can actually take the tests that Larry's created for his dev and test environments, and I can use almost identical tests to test in production. And then lastly, from the operations side, non-intrusive diagnostics, using application performance monitoring, a very lightweight profiling mechanism to collect information about application performance failures, whether they be application failures, whether they be performance or exception related. These are all great, and from a data perspective, gives me the ability to actually give the dev team information they can use to help them get to the bottom of the issues and hopefully get me a fix as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So we saw that we got much more actionable feedback when we're opening up the work items in TFS. I've got all of the data that was captured by System Center converted over into the IntelliTrace format. I've got very rich data that, along with my symbols that I'm managing with my builds, can get me back to the code that matches the version that was deployed into my application. So I've got really rich data. I've got a bunch of parameters that were captured with it. We saw things like which controller was hit, stuff on the URL. We'll capture things like SQL statements that were executed, parameter values. So there's a lot of information that I never had before. So this is all very, very rich. And when I start to embed things like DSC as part of my solution, and I'm embedding the configuration of my environment as code so that these things can all be provisioned in my testing and my staging environments, scripted, automatically, repeatable, we're getting into a much more solid solution that we can push out much faster. Now, some of the things that we didn't show you around the DSC is there's a whole pile of automation that's capable with these, that will spin up VMs, it will deploy your apps, it will configure things. If you missed the session on Monday that talked into it, they have a repeat session on Thursday that's dedicated strictly to the DSC. So if you're looking at deployment automation, that coupled with the in-release acquisition that we announced on Monday, I think we're getting a really, really solid DevOps automated continuous deployment story going. There's more slides, right?
There is.
So we've got VS Web tests, can be used by System Center, global monitoring. We've got Operations Manager. We've got PowerShell. We've got this common goal where Dev and Ops are working together to really reduce that mean time to resolution because we want to get the fixes in production much faster. When we start to look at the capabilities that we're producing now, we can do automated things like A/B testing, where at DSC, I can spin up a brand new environment that maybe has a new version of the application on a brand new VM that I can do some A/B testing to see what customers like better. I can then, if that's working well, I can spin down the old ones and keep the new ones up. We're doing this, and we're taking a lot of lessons learned from the Bing team. The Bing team is one of our internal sort of DevOps poster childs. The developers within the Bing team really do own the code that gets pushed out onto the servers. They have access to production servers, and when they come up with something new that they want to try out, the developers can push it out to 1,000 servers if they want. Now, granted, we're not all operating on the, 100,000 server scale that Bing is or whatever. So when you think 1,000, well, that's actually a small increment. But when you get into the automation and the scripting and all of these capabilities, you can really start to think of the power and the capabilities that I can deliver meaningful business value in a much more consistent and repeatable manner.
I got it.
And you got it.
Yes.
All right. So, related content. We've got the Charlie session on Thursday, which is all about diving deeper into System Center and some of those monitoring capabilities, and the repeat of the DSC session on Thursday as well. And then I've got... So apparently the thing to make our slides work better is if we display them on the screen.
So we could have handled the transition way better.
All right. Yeah, we could have. Speaking of...
Here's your related content.
All right. Fellow that pointed his finger at the screen, heads up because there's a package coming. That one actually reached him.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. You want to go back a
Yes,
slide?
I will go back a slide.
See, now, if this had been scripted and automated, no problems, right? Do you want to go back one more even?
Sure.
Just to kind of, yeah, so we were talking to this. There's the stuff that we're talking about. Probably makes more sense now, right? All right, because we have pictures.
So I blame our shortness because we couldn't see the monitor down there.
That's right. Oh, yeah, see, there's a monitor down there. Okay, they didn't build this for short guys. All right, so.
Should we
Blah,
get
blah,
to-
blah, 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 blah,
Yes,
blah.
let's get down to
Next slide. Blah, 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 blah. Next slide. All right. Related content. So this is where we actually figured out what we're doing up here.
Yes. At this point, we'd like to open it up for questions. There's our email addresses. You can always email us with questions later. But if you wouldn't mind, stand up to the mics if you have any questions. This is being recorded, I believe.
I believe, yes. Go back to the previous line. Yeah, because now that we're actually displaying it,
They
you want
don't-
to
they
see
don't
some of
wanna
this
see-
information? Yeah, okay. We're sorry. Or leave. It'll make us sad if you leave, though.
All right, yes.
Would you recommend this approach for any size company, or just, I mean, are there some limits, or
Are you talking about the DSC?
the whole concept, the whole chain?
I think this absolutely applies to any size shop.
Yeah, no, just because we're a two-man shop doesn't mean that it doesn't run even better in a larger organization. In fact, it definitely would run better in a larger organization.
What I'm probably thinking about is the licensing and everything.
Right.
Also.
Right.
For a smaller
I mean, there's
company.
certainly those considerations. And we're trying to look at, I mean, there's lots of different ways that you can sort of piecemeal get your way to this. I mean, this is the whole big full solution, right,
Yeah.
with the full system center. Keep an eye out for some announcements that will be coming a little bit later that will help fill some of the gaps. But we've got IntelliTrace as a standalone collector, so you can just download that and use that. It's free. You do require Visual Studio Ultimate to go with that. You've got TFS in the cloud, so that you can now, pay as you go, and you don't need to, buy servers and install TFS on-prem and everything like that. But yes,
System Center.
for a two-man shop, this is probably overkill to
Yes.
install System Center for two servers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so is there planned support for other languages and like where IntelliTrace will integrate or something like that with SCOM for very large shops that are multi-language, multi-platform?
Right. So the language support, you can probably talk to the APM piece better than I can. As far as IntelliTrace goes, IntelliTrace works for .NET managed languages. Internally, we test it extensively with VB and C#. Anecdotal information says it works with F#. Essentially, what we're doing is we're implemented as a CLR profiler, so we're instrumenting IL code. So the actual language that's used to generate the IL is irrelevant as far as the instrumentation and data collection goes. Where we will run into challenges is that magical getting back to code, right? Because we haven't necessarily implemented all of the data gathering and all of the connection back to all of the different types of code through whatever symbol mechanisms may exist for those languages. But we still have all of the data captured that you can look at through the call stack in the locals window.
Do you know if that's like on the roadmap or anybody's goals for actually working towards that? Because that's like take over the industry kind of.
There's certainly interest in native, So looking at solutions for C++. And of course, with the huge prevalence of JavaScript, that's becoming an increasingly important language as well. So those are definitely on our roadmap. Nothing coming, with the next release or anything like that. So.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So you had your web server settings, the DSC settings in your solution. Were your web tests honoring those settings?
Well, not in our demo here. We didn't configure our builds to actually spin up environments to run those tests against, but that is what you would want to do.
Okay.
Does the system center or the system center push back to TFS so the engineering teams actually know that their code has been deployed?
I do not. So I need to go back and take a look at it. I think once you close the alert, I believe it does close the TFS ticket on the other side, but it's been a while since I walked that workflow. I believe it does.
Can you tell me more about the APM agent? Is it like a separate process running on the box, or is it a
So
big process?
it's part of the operations manager agent. It's a separate service. So if you look in your services tab, you'll see the system center operation manager or management service, and then you'll see the APM service right underneath it. It's very, very lightweight. We're running it in Microsoft.com on a fair number of their servers to look for production issues.
So it's going to be running onto the system account, so it's going to be having access to getting into all the process that's running in. Isn't there some security concerns around it, like especially if I have shared servers?
If I were to look at it, I believe it's running under the local system. Yeah.
No more questions? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out at the last session of the day today. I will be at the booth tomorrow morning through to 3 o'clock or something like that. And other than that, have a great night, and thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.